Welcome back to the Childhood Cancer Perspective, and thank you all for your continued support. This podcast has given me a really amazing opportunity to not only kind of share my own story and our daughter's story, but also the story of so many others, from families to doctors, researchers, scientists. It's been really incredible. So today, my guest is somebody that I've had the honor of hearing speak, not only in DC, but most recently at our gala here in August. Which everybody loved, and I still hear about it, how they loved how you spoke to them and kind of made it to where everybody could understand, and they were just in love with the speech. So my guest today is Tracy Ryan, the co-founder and chief communications officer of Nkore Biotherapeutics. So Tracy, thank you so much for being with me today.
It is so nice to be back with you, Curtis. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so I would like to start off with kind of telling us a little bit about you, and then we'll end a little bit into how Nkore became what it is now.
Sure. I mean, my journey started, almost 12 years ago now. My daughter, Sophie, is 12, and at 8.5 months old, she was diagnosed with a low-grade optic pathway glioma. It's a brain tumor. These are traditionally considered survivable tumors. It's about a 90 to 95% survival rate, which is a good thing. The unfortunate thing is the recurrence rate is about 85%. So sadly, my daughter ended up failing 7 solid years of chemotherapy with 1 6-month break when she was a baby. And it was torture, as I know you know how horrible chemotherapy can be, the in and outs of the hospital. Every time they spike a fever over 100, you're rushing in and admitting them into the emergency room. That happened dozens of times. Sophie ended up having 5 brain surgeries, which has cost her most of her vision, along with 11 surgeries in total when it comes to full body procedures. So the kid's really been through it. We just found out the other day she's now officially had about 75 MRIs. And if you can imagine having to sit in a tunnel that sounds like a jackhammer's going off for an hour since the time you were 9 months old until the time you're 12, it's been a lot. It's definitely not what you think is going to happen when you have a child. It's the absolute worst case scenario. We had hope where a lot of families aren't given that. So we are grateful for that because Sophie's tumor did have a high survival rate. However, we do not know if she would have been one of those children that actually did survive this tumor had we not intervened and taken over her care in 2019, which we'll jump more into in a few minutes. But she'd really been through just about every option that Western medicine had available to her. The only therapy that was FDA approved that they had left to offer her was a chemotherapy called carboplatin that when she was a baby, she was highly, highly, highly allergic to, and it never worked. It was never going to be curative. And they wanted to give it to her at 4 times the dose. So it was going to absolutely destroy her life even worse than it had already been destroyed had we had to move her to that protocol. Thankfully, we did not. In between that time, and not long after Sophie was diagnosed, my journey really took a hard turn. And that's when we met the film star and former talk show host, Ricky Lake, who at the time was looking at medical cannabis as an option for children with cancer. She had been introduced to a little girl that was a big fan of hers when she was on Dancing with the Stars. And she brought her onto her show. And she just fell in love with this child. And this child also had an optic pathway glioma brain tumor, which oddly enough is one of the rarest tumors in all of pediatric brain cancers, especially to be diagnosed as a baby. And she wanted to help this little girl. So her and her previous husband, Christian, had gone on this crazy search around the world to find options for this child. And they had landed on medical cannabis. And they started doing an enormous amount of research, which led them to begin filming a documentary that was on Netflix for 5 years. It's now on Gaia, Apple TV, and Prime. And it's called Weed the People. And they opened up all this research that they had done to these other families that they had met, ours included. And they brought us all of this data and said, we'd like to know if you'd like to take a look at this. Are you interested in trying this plant on your child? And I knew a lot about cannabis recreationally because I was a college student that loved to have fun. I used to be a rave DJ. I've smoked a joint in my day. And I never really saw it as a hard drug of any kind. It was something that made me very creative. It made me peaceful. It made me happy. It made me nice. I mean, I'm a nice person, but like I was just really nice when I had a little bit of cannabis. It just makes you a very sweet person for the vast majority of the time. It's not like alcohol where people can become, raging just a-holes, for lack of a better word, if they drink too much. It just wasn't the case with cannabis and how I experienced it. So I wasn't terrified when I first heard about this, but the thought of giving a 9-month-old baby, at the time I called it weed because that's what we all called it back then. And we now call it cannabis. But I wanted to look at the research. And when I did, I was very impressed with the science that had been done on this plant. And so at 9 months old, Sophie became a part of this documentary that followed our family for 6 years. And she soon became one of the more well-known children around the world for using this plant very successfully. And it was incredible, the things that we were seeing. In fact, the first 13 months that she was on chemotherapy, her tumor that they told us likely would not shrink at all, shrank 85 to 90%. And we were watching her be the only child that didn't actually end up needing to continue to come back every week post chemo infusions to make sure that her counts were rebounding because they were not dropping the way the other children's were. So long story short, we saw an enormous amount of benefit from this plant. And that's really put me on the path of research. And research led me to Israel, to the Technion Institute, to work with Dr. Daddy Mary, who is one of the world-renowned scientists in medical cannabis and the use of this plant for cancer and for autism. I had a wonderful relationship with him, but we weren't able to really help Soap. So my hunt continued. And that's when I met Dr. Anahi Jewett in 2018. And when I met her, I got really excited. She's at UCLA. She'd been there at that time for 30 years. She had been creating this therapy that in over 350, well, she actually did over 500 humanized mouse models, but we claim about 350 of them to back the science that we're using for our now immunotherapy. And she started to educate me on how people get cancer and why they get cancer and what her science had told her. And what she had learned at UCLA over these 3 decades was that our immune system comprises of a lot of different types of white blood cells, natural killer cells and T cells being 2 of them. Many people in the cancer community are much more familiar with T cells. We've heard more about T cell therapy for a lot longer. But T cell therapy can be toxic. You can die from it. You can have graft versus host or a cytokine storm when your immune system rejects these cells because they're from a donor, and the body can then turn against itself. And then there's natural killer cells. And Dr. Jewett began to describe these to me as the generals in the marching army of our immune system. And so what that means is the natural killer cells are the cells that tell all the other cells what to do, telling the T cells what to do, the cytokines what to do, so forth and so on. It also regulates organ function and just immune function in the body. And what she had found was when these cells fail, that is when it's your first step that you're taking towards getting cancer, because your natural killer cells have the ability to see these cancer stem and stem-like cells. And these cancer stem and stem-like cells are the cells from which cancer comes from. We all have these in our body. We all have these cancer stem cells. But our natural killer cells keep them at bay and keep them regulated. Well, when the NK cells aren't performing, there's nothing there to keep those stem cells from turning into actual cancer and then thriving and growing in the body. The problem with chemo and radiation is it knocks this system down even further. So you go in with a fractured immune system, and then you have to take these agents that weaken your immune system that you need to stay alive and thrive exponentially. So the very thing that you need to help you get better is also being destroyed at the same time that you're treating the cancer. And I'm sure that you've heard this. I've heard this for years with chemotherapy. It's kill the cancer before you kill the patient, essentially. So I got really excited about this. And this seemed like something that could be really potentially an option for Sophie. We still at this point didn't understand why she had this brain tumor. But after she had a brain surgery, a year or 2 after that, after I met Dr. Jewett, we were able to get fluid off of her brain from one of her surgeries. And what we discovered was that Sophie had 0 functioning natural killer cells in her brain. And Dr. Jewett, she studied over 1,000 patients. And what she had found in all these cancer patients is their NK cells were malfunctioned. Well, my daughters weren't malfunctioned. They just weren't there at all. But from the neck down, her natural killer cells were performing like that of a healthy person. And this really excited Dr. Jewett because this not only helped us understand something in brain cancer, a disease that she had never researched at this point, nor had she looked into pediatrics because she's such a lovely, warm-hearted person. working with kids made her very sad, and it was just a field she avoided. She'd look at the big cancer she focused on was pancreatic. But breast, liver, lung, oral, colorectal, she'd studied all these leukemias, lymphomas. This was a massive breakthrough in brain cancer. And the fact that Sophie's immune function was working so well from the neck down told us two things. One, the medical cannabis was absolutely doing something to the immune function and helping it in some significant way. And B, we believe Sophie had a blood-brain barrier malfunction that was keeping these natural killer cells that were performing so beautifully in the rest of her body, which explained her immune function and her ability to heal so quickly, and why she wasn't having crazy bruising and swelling when she was coming out of these brain surgeries like other children did, and the things that we witnessed. So it began to make sense that cannabis was really supporting her in a beautiful way. But it also told me that cannabis was never going to be what stopped her tumor, because there were no natural killer cells in her brain to activate. And by activating the T cells, you were only going to do so much. So that's when she and I joined forces, and we began building this company now called Nkore Biotherapeutics. That will, in February, March 17th on St. Patrick's Day will be our 5-year anniversary. And we have been not only continuing to research cannabis, but our focus has shifted. My focus, I should say, has shifted. Hers was always natural killer cells, but my focus has shifted to natural killer cell therapy. And so now we have manufactured these cells. We have produced them in both Cancun, Mexico, at a CGMP regulated facility. It's regulated by Mexican standards, although they do follow FDA standards here in the United States when it comes to manufacturing these cells. They're not regulated by the United States FDA, but they do follow their guidelines, giving us safety and security that if we manufacture there, we're going to be doing it the same standard. We're going to be doing it here in the United States. That's my point in saying that. And we have also been successful manufacturing them here in the US. And because Mexican law is different from our laws here, we are more easily able to treat patients in Cancun. Cell therapy is looked at very differently there. And so we have an incredible clinic that we've been working with that has now treated 4 patients. And my daughter, Sophie, was the first child and the second patient to receive this treatment. She's now received 2 therapies, 2 infusions. She received one in December of 2023 and one in July of 2024. And we had a scan on December 31st of 2024, December 30th, right before New Year's. And what we're seeing is very exciting. Not only did we see what's called pseudoprogression in her disease, which pseudoprogression is fake progression. Pseudoprogression is where the immune cells go into the disease and cause it to swell. We've now started to see the tumor begin to crumble. And I use the word crumble because that is what the neuro-oncologist that has reviewed these scans for us has told us. He's a legend in the field of neuro-oncology. And he said it appears as if the tumor is crumbling. And when you look at the comparisons to her previous scans and to what her scans look like now, it's a significant change. And the beauty of this, Curtis, is she's had 0 negative side effects. 0. And we spread these infusions 7 months apart because we wanted to see how long the cells were actually going to last for. Were they going to show what we call in the field persistence? Was there longevity to this therapy? If we give an infusion, is it going to work for 30 days, or are we going to continue to see benefits for 7-8 months out? And 7 months later, we were still seeing a benefit, and we decided to stop, monitoring there and do another infusion so that we could see a reduction of the disease more expeditiously. We also treated an adult leukemia patient. We've given a woman with glioblastoma her second infusion. She's now alive. I think it's roughly 6 months past her end of life diagnosis date, and she's feeling incredible. So we're hoping to see some promise in her upcoming scans. But our first leukemia patient, on day 58, 75% of his disease was already gone. And Mayo Clinic was unable to get his disease state lowered at all. In all the treatment they'd been giving him, he was stuck at 20% cancer in his bone marrow and in his blood. And now he's at 1% cancer in his body after only 2 infusions. Again, no negative side effects. And in fact, when he showed up for treatment, he felt terrible. And within 24 hours, his whole world started to change. So as you can imagine, where we are now is very exciting, but it's also frustrating because we are still limited to treating patients in Cancun where it is out of pocket. Insurance does not cover it. The therapy is not cheap. And we are in a situation now where we're working hard to file for FDA approval here in the United States, but that's a process. So we're hoping to have our pre-application submitted to the FDA here in the coming months. And we're hoping for an approval sometimes later this year, could be at the beginning of next year. And when that happens, we'll be able to treat compassionate use cases in the United States for anyone who's terminal or incurable, while we do the larger scale human trials where we focus on one or two disease types. So I know that's a lot, but that's where I've been and where I'm at now and where we hope to go.
Sure. No, I think that's, I've got a lot actually that I wanted to kind of follow up on. But so when you talk about like getting FDA approval and then coming to the States and doing compassionate use or compassionate cases, is that something here that insurance would cover? Would that be out of pocket in the States, even with FDA approval?
Not under compassionate use. That would still be out of pocket. But one of the things that I am hoping to do is use my Saving Sophie charity, it's a 501c3, to raise funds for patients with a focus on pediatrics. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the California fires that we had out here recently and how devastating those were, how many people lost their homes and just all the destruction that took place. Thankfully, my family was okay. We did get very close and we watched the fires come over the hill, but we remained safe. Unfortunately, many people that we know, many of our supporters, our sponsors, those guys, a lot of them lost everything. And so we felt that it was going to be a bit tone deaf to continue on with a celebratory event when so many people were homeless and had endured so much loss. So the goal is to reschedule that event for later in the year, hopefully in October around my daughter's birthday. And we would then use those funds to help write grants to children. And for anyone that's listening that would like to start supporting us now, the website is just savingsophie.org, SOPHIE.
Yeah, perfect. I think if you're going to get involved with an organization, this is definitely one that I would absolutely urge anybody to do so. I know there's, and every year that we're in Cure Fest in DC or at our events or things like that, it's always bittersweet for us to hear the amazing progress that you guys have. It's unbelievable. And to be honest with you, I've never physically spoken to her, but if you ever see Sophie in person, she just lights up an entire room and takes over. And it's incredible. And so that's that light, that inspiration. And I love it. And I want all this to move forward and have so much more success and to come into the US and be able to treat patients here. That I hope that is what the end goal and the end, what happens. I think that's amazing. And
Curtis, I think it will excite you to know that my team is especially passionate about pediatric brain cancer, especially. So the goal with the larger scale trials is to start in adult leukemia. But the second trial that I'm hopeful we will be doing will be in DIPG in children in brain cancer. If we cannot move into children that fast, it would be adult glioblastoma, which would then immediately open us up to DIPG in kids. So I have a lot of support with the team that I'm working with that is employed by my company. And they really see the unmet needs of these kids. And the larger scale trials will be covered by insurance. So let's say we start in adult leukemia. That would be covered by insurance. And it would actually be us that cover the expenses of that because we're called the sponsor. So that's why we have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to be successful as a company, which is always challenging when you're dealing with an economy like what we're dealing with right now. There's a lot of changes that are happening on the federal level with grants. As you know, we just lost $100 million of $160 million in funding in pediatric cancer grants or pediatric cancer funding from the federal government that we're now trying to fight to get reinitiated. And then we have, the federal grant programs that have been put on hold, and we're not sure how long those are going to be put on hold for. That could greatly affect the type of grants that we can submit for to help us with that capital, because it is extraordinarily expensive and time consuming to go through this process. So whereas, again, just to make it clear, larger scale trials are covered, the compassionate use are not, which is where we want to use the foundation.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's just for, if anybody doesn't know, pediatric brain cancer is the leading cause of death within the pediatric cancer world, and the least funded and the least understood. The reality of the situation is with pediatric cancer in general is, I think our biggest hinder is that we don't know why it happens. And
Mm.
it's always kind of a crapshoot, and it's very, very terrible luck. And the day we figure out why is the day we can effectively really, really go after it. But the fact that we have trials that can be focused on this type, we just got, finally, after almost 5 years, we finally got JC's tissue donated to Gift from a Child in CHOP in Philadelphia through the Children's Brain Tumor Network. So her tumor can be studied. And we have a doctor in New York that is doing specific studies with NIH grants for her type of cancer. And so we're finally seeing something there, which I'm very happy to talk about, because that's, and if you ever need tissue, I can tell you where to get it. Her
Right.
tissue's out there and it needs to be studied, and all of these kids need just an opportunity to really survive and thrive this.
Absolutely. For us, we really have been looking at the fluid in the brain. And that is something that we have been lucky enough to get from 3 children now, my daughter being one of them, another little girl with glioblastoma, and another young lady who has a more aggressive form of Sophie's disease. It's an anaplastic astrocytoma. I believe it's a grade 2-3. So I think it's a mixed grade. But this poor child has been on chemotherapy since she was a baby, and she's, I think, like 18 or 19 years old now. So what we had found in all 3 children was, in Sophie's case, again, no natural killer cells, but in the case of the other 2 little girls, their natural killer cells were extraordinarily malfunctioned, and the immune system within the brain was malfunctioned, whereas Sophie's immune system in her brain was perfect. She just didn't have the NK cells to combat the disease, which I don't know enough about the way the brain works and the way that the immune system works. But to me, I have to wonder, is that why one is more aggressive than the other? What is causing the difference between a child getting an aggressive brain cancer versus a low-grade brain cancer? What's happening there? And I believe that studying the tissue and the fluid that the brain sits in, which is the protective environment for the brain, those things I think are going to lead us to a lot of answers that I know we've both been looking for so long. And above all, for me, in a lot of these situations, it's truly quality of life as well. I know for Sophie, the last chemotherapy protocol that she endured was 4 chemos at once. It's called TPCV. And my poor child was unable to go to school for an entire year. She was unable to walk for 6 weeks because just the chemo. I know the tumors can cause far more damage than the treatments. In this case, it was the treatment causing far more damage with Sophie than the tumor was. And that's always been the case. The treatment and cysts have been what has caused so much damage in her body, not the actual brain tumor. But she couldn't walk. She was having 10 seizures a day. She got C. diff, which is a horrible, horrible gut infection that sometimes is very hard to get rid of and sometimes comes back forever, like off and on. Thankfully, it hasn't been the case with her. But to have a treatment that isn't making our patients feel bad and that is helping to repair what we believe is why they got sick in the first place, and we're not targeting the cancer with toxicity, we're actually trying to fix the actual problem and not just slap a Band-Aid on it. Because with pediatric cancer, a child with leukemia can go through 3.5 years of treatment. And as you know, they can then recur and then have to go through another 3.5 years of treatment. And it's just not, if they survive it, what it does to them long term in itself can be devastating. My child's entire left side of her body is broken. She is legally blind. She has brain damage in the area that computes math. We just got a report card, and Curtis, I swear it makes me want to cry just thinking about this report card, because my kid has struggled so much in school because she's had to miss so much and she's had so many surgeries and she's got this damage that's in her brain. She got all A's, 1 B, and an F in math, but she has brain damage. But to think that prior to this, all of her report cards have been D's and C's and F's, and now like she's getting it and she's starting to do well. just getting an A for a parent like me on a report card. Literally, we're taking her out to dinner tonight and buying her a birthday brownie, even though it's not her birthday, and a virgin pina colada, which is always a big treat for her. We're celebrating this. Parents don't understand, families don't understand, people don't understand how hard this life is. And my life has been cake compared to what you had to go through. This has been a cakewalk, and it has been devastating in the same breath. But compared to what your family has had to endure, we're a success story. Sophie's been deemed a survivor, but so many other people don't have the ability to say that. And our government funding is getting cut. We now have 8% of all government funding issued to kids anyway, which is a slap in the face, that 92% goes to adults. It was 3.8% for how many years? Nobody is helping our children. Nobody is figuring this out. And if I can play some small role in changing that and in helping these babies, I mean, I've already reached my lifelong goal of helping my daughter. I don't want to stop there. There's too many people suffering. And if we can do it in a way that doesn't make their lives worse, then what a blessing will that be? And I'm not saying this is a one size fits all. We may need some low dose chemotherapy. We may need some low dose radiation. But the quotations I'm going to throw up here is low dose. We don't believe patients are going to have to be hit with 13 months of toxicity and poison to their brain or to their bodies. We don't believe that's going to be the future of medicine. So just to have some sort of optimism when there's been none for so long, that in itself gets me up every day and gets me out of bed and gets me straight to work.
Yeah. I think we're singing the same song, to be honest with you, because I know for the longest time with us trying to figure out ways to get bills passed or ways to get things done here in Wisconsin, and we've got something else that we're brewing on right now, trying to get it to go together. And I hope that we can make something happen. And my wife has always asked me the question, if you get to this goal, do you feel like you've done enough? And the short answer is no. The short answer is, if I get to this goal, it means that I got to this goal, and it means I can get higher. And I actually love hearing no from senators, from congressmen and women. I love it because it means that I'm going to work that much harder and get that much louder. And I think it's an incredible push. And so I love knowing that we have, again, in the grand scheme of things, a very small portion, a part of all of this. But if it makes a difference, if it helps one family, if you see success on the face of one child or one adult through everything that you're doing right now, that's massive. And you have to take every single victory, no matter what it is, and you have to run with it. And I had this conversation with a mom not too long ago where it was, when do you get excited when something goes well? And it's every time something goes well, no matter how big or small, whether it's, it's a D instead of an F on a report card, or whether it's, I was spoken to another warrior and she decided, I'm not getting an NG tube because I'm going to eat right before they come in to put it in and prove I don't need it. Like, that's massive. You know what I mean? That's huge.
Wow.
And all these victories, they mean so much. And to us, they mean the world. To the outsiders who have not taken on this cause yet, we may be looked at as crazy and average and whatever. Well, I've been called average a lot lately, which is a whole nother situation. But the reality of it is, there's so much behind why we're doing this, right? For us, for our family, we couldn't save JC. We could not give her the life that she deserved to have, but we damn sure gave her everything we could in the time she had with us. And now our fight is to make sure that there aren't any other families that continue to feel the way that we do and had to go through what we did. And so when we see success through Nkore, through Onco Heroes, through other companies that are pushing through to make things different for our kids and give them a chance or a choice even, I can't think of a better way and a better organizations to support and causes to support. And these kids are so damn important and so incredible. And we are missing from the highest levels of government, from the highest levels of people, we are missing the genuine and true hearts of these kids in them. That's what this world is missing right now.
Yeah, I agree completely, Curtis. You gave me chills a couple of times there. And one of the things that I in this journey, I've had to develop a lot of tools, survival tools, which I'm sure you have had to do as well. And we all have the tools that we use to get us through the day. And one of the tools that I have used is the saying that everything happens just the way that it was supposed to, simply because it did. And when you can settle into that and you can accept that the horrible things in life happen to you because it was meant to put you on that path to be who you were born to be, then you can start to swallow that hard pill a little easier. That's been my experience. Everyone's experience is different. But my point in saying that is I believe that our children, JC for you and Sophie for me, came into this world. And whether we sign up for these things before we get here or not, I believe that we do. I believe we accept a path before we come here. It's just a belief that I have because our journey has been so incredibly, what I feel, is guided. I'm a very spiritual person. I believe that there is more. I believe that there are people or past loved ones or God, spirit, however you relate, that gives us clues, signs, whispers, knowings that we're on the right track. And for me, I have endured an enormous amount of loss just as a young child, a lot of death, back to back to back to back to back. And then my kid gets sick. And then I spend 12 years immersed in the world of pediatric cancer. And I get close to these families. I get close to them. And I've watched more children pass than anyone should ever have to. And every time a child gains their wings, I pray to them, please be the army behind me that helps me move this forward. Please join the team that is laying those little clues for me along the way and showing me the little pebbles to follow and giving me those little knowings, those tingles that I feel, putting the right people in my path. Join the army that's up there helping me. Because I believe that this is why I was given breath. I believe that my daughter was given to me because this was a task and a burden, because pediatric cancer is a burden on everyone, the patient, the parents, the community, anyone who loves that child. And I mean burden in a way that not like the kid is a burden. My God, this child has been the most beautiful gift to me that I would go through this 100 times just to keep her as mine. But just the pain and suffering that we all have to endure, the loss of not just their childhood, the financial strains, the emotional strains, the strains on a marriage. And by the way, congratulations to you for staying married. It's, for anybody who doesn't know this, it is a 85% divorce rate when you have a child with a chronic disease, much less a terminal disease. My husband and I have been together for almost 18 years. How we survived it, I still sometimes wonder. We have done a lot of work to fall back in love with each other because it got so hard and so bad. But he too believes that Sophie was given to us for a very special purpose. And it took him a long time to kind of get there. He didn't have those intuition alarm bells going off like I have my whole life. I feel very blessed in that way, that I've always felt like I've been able to hear or know things that put me on a path to get to X, Y, and Z. And I've always paid very close attention to that, and it's never steered me wrong. But it took him a while to kind of wrap his arms around it. So he had a much, much, much harder time than I did when Sophie was going through all this. He didn't have the outlets. Like Kids was the company that I ended up building off of all my cannabis knowledge. There was a tincture line that we had for 8-9 years before we had to sell it to move into immunotherapy, because I'm now working with the FDA and working with a university that's federally funded. I couldn't own a cannabis company. But despite that, Josh didn't have those outlets initially. And once he also finally wrapped his head around the fact that, okay, this is what was supposed to happen to us. This is what we were supposed to go through. Now let's just ride the roller coaster, because it is just that. It is a roller coaster, and it is one where you have blindfolds on, where you have no idea if the next turn is going to be an uphill battle or you're going to be having fun on the way down to victory. And it's really for us been how we ride that roller coaster. How are we able to manage all of this trauma that just happens all the time? Even still, now that she's healthy and she's deemed a survivor, she still has so many disabilities. We're fighting with the school constantly to get her the services. She's 12 years old, Curtis, and cannot read because she's legally blind. She's having to learn Braille, and the school system keeps screwing us and trying to cut her hours. We've already sued them once last year. We're having to sue them again. I mean, there's just always something when you have a child that is compromised. But if you can wake up in the mornings and say, okay, I'm going to dust myself off. Yesterday was awful, but it is a new day. The sun has risen again. I'm alive to take a breath. I'm going to do something with this day. And I'm not able to do that every day, but I try to do it more days than not, because even though my daughter is well, that would be horrible of me to just stop there and not continue to try and help other kids. I would not be able to sleep at night if I had only served my daughter in this mission. Now the mission is to not just serve her. It is to serve as many as I can touch and to get to the masses and to use the community to help me get there. I don't want to do this by myself. I want to work with as many other foundations. I'm talking to about 5 or 6 of them right now, all of them which you know that comes to the Brainstorm Summit every year. Lisa Ward has been a huge help to me on this mission, telling me who to talk to, who could be good, who could be, what patients are available that might want this treatment. She has been phenomenal in helping us navigate this world. I want the community to feel like this is theirs too, that this is something that they can be involved in, that they can help us with, and that they can be a part of, and that they too can help us rise up and change the way healthcare is being done. Our loved ones, they just deserve better. You hear the C word and it is devastating. No matter if it's stage 1 or stage 4, it is a devastating diagnosis, and it is devastating because of the survival rates and because of the torture you have to endure as a patient just to try and get one.
If you've seen cancer treatment and if you've seen it in an adult, you won't understand what it's like to go through it as a kid, and to watch a child go through it you've never been more helpless as a parent or felt more helpless than to watch your child go through these treatments. And to kind of go back a little bit, I've always said, and I will continue to say, my children, I have 3 girls, my children are my greatest achievement. I will never achieve anything greater than my girls.
No, sir.
I have one in college, one that'll be in college next year, at the end of next year. And of course we have JC, who is the absolute inspiration to everything that we do. And, I say now that, when she passed in 2021, so we're coming up on the 4th year. I say now that, the one thing that has given us peace along the way is the one thing that was said by her pastor at her funeral. And it was that when JC got to heaven, she said, but I only had 8 years. And God said, but look what you did with those 8 years. And it's hard for me to say that every time, but it's like, that is what has given me the peace that I need to kind of move forward, because that means, and it's so true, because even as a parent, obviously, yes, we are biased to, our kids, and they're the greatest thing on the planet and all that. But the amount of people that have reached out to us, even that I don't even know, and said that JC has impacted their lives, or they've made changes in their life because of her story and because of what we're doing. And, her class at school, still, they have a picture that they go as they get to the next grade, and they carry the picture with her there, and she's celebrated in her class every year. The impact that these kids have, whether they continue to fight, whether they pass and gain their wings, the impact that they have is just unbelievable. And that innocence that I was talking about before, you mentioned burden, and not in the way that the kids are a burden, but they often feel like they're burdens, right? And they vocalize that. I know JC a lot of times would, if something would happen, if she would get sick, if her NG would come out, whatever, she would spend the next 20 minutes apologizing and being like, I'm so like, you don't have to apologize. We're here. No, we haven't slept in 2 days, and we're, we don't even know that we're a couple anymore, because we're become medical parents. And when you become medical parents, that takes over your life. And yes, we, this year in June, we'll be married 21 years. And we've talked about it before. I actually did a podcast episode about it where we talked about it. We don't know what the answer is as to why we came out on the other side. And I asked her this question, and she had never told me this, that yeah, she thought there were times when she thought we were going to break up because we were, you're arguing and fighting over stupid things, and it's not that you, and I always say that it's parents that break up when this type of situation happens. It's not necessarily because you fall out of love. It's because so much is happening, and the stress level that we go through, and the amount that you're not focusing on being a couple at that moment. You're not focusing on marriage, and
You're surviving.
And I remember, having her home, and we had a friend, thankfully, that is a nurse practitioner that came over one night and said, "You're going out of this house." And she sat with JC for an hour. We went to a hardware store and walked around. Like you know what I mean? It was like, and that was it. And the whole time we're just worried about getting back home to her. Like that was it, and that's what people don't realize. They look in that, and I always call it the 80-20 rule. And you never want to be on the side of the 80, you want to be, how many couples do we know that are not together anymore or couldn't survive it? And it is an extremely hard life, but these, what we do for these kids, it's unbelievable. And I would do it 100 times over. I hated being separated because, she was diagnosed in 2020, COVID. And so at that point, it was only one of us in the hospital. I hated it. And I know she did too. But, her sisters, I think, got her through a lot of that. She would call them on FaceTime during the day. And I say often she would just sit there with the phone on and they wouldn't even talk. She just wanted to be with her sisters and be home. And we made the best of it, being in a hospital, and for, I think 52 days for her stem cell transplant. And, there's a lot going on in all of this, but all the way back in the beginning, I didn't find out until after her stem cell transplant that the blood-brain barrier was even a thing. I didn't even know that it was a thing. And we are again, kind of going back, that we were shooting her and filling her body full of chemo, and it's not going to the area where the cancer originated and where it was the tumor never came back. The radiation and the resection took care of that. But at some point, nothing is stopping stuff from happening up here. We're just going and destroying this child's body at 30, 40, 50 pounds. And chemo is a bulldozer. All right. There's no rhyme or reason. It just kills everything. Like that's the whole purpose of this. And it doesn't know what not to look for. It just says, okay, there's something that looks like cancer. It's got to go.
Let's hit
it.
Well, the brainstem is literally one of the most protected parts of the entire body. It is the most protected part, right? The brainstem. And for a lot of people that's listening, they don't know what your daughter had. It's almost impenetrable because of where it's at in the brainstem it's the center of everything. It's the central operating system. And so it's so protected. So just to penetrate not just the blood-brain barrier, but then the barrier around the brainstem, the levels of toxicity they give these children is astronomical.
Yeah. And you had also mentioned too that, side effects or the treatments, the treatments themselves can be worse and often are worse than what the cancer actually will do to you. And it's to see the way it can change just your physical appearance and change your body and change everything down to your taste buds. Okay. How you know what I mean? Like JC all of a sudden wanted only sour stuff, and it was weird. And, and it's like just those little things that it changes. And then everybody you look at the one thing that usually you associate with cancer, which is your hair falling out. And it's honestly, to me, when her hair finally started falling out, I was on the floor in a puddle. Like at that point, but she was like, "Oh, it fell out, whatever. I guess I just won't have to cut it anymore or brush it anymore." Like that's just how these kids, that's how they think. And to us, we're looking at it like this is horrible. But the reality of it is that is probably the least and most acceptable side effect okay, your hair falls out. Whatever, because we love it when the peach fuzz came back and you rub her head and she's like, "Stop it." She didn't want you to.
For me, it was the same though, Curtis. Like it was something about the hair. I was doing really well, figuratively speaking. As well as a brand new mother whose newborn has been diagnosed with brain cancer, who's postpartum and hormonal, it can be doing. when her hair started falling out, it was something about that that just made it so real for me. And I've always been curious if other parents kind of went through that same thing, if it was the hair that like really just sent them over the edge. Because for me, that was what really sent me over the edge. That moment where I'm like, it's, she had this beautiful, just white blonde hair when she was born, because I'm natural blonde. And so was she. But when she came out, it was really light. And I would just play with her little, like, reddish strawberry blonde hair. And I remember the first time a clump came out, and it just put me on the floor. Because in that moment, I'm like, okay, now she's going to not just be a cancer patient. She's also going to look. And the fact that she was younger made it a little better because, kids that young can have less hair and it can be falling out. But as the years went on, we got lucky. Sophie never, like she was almost completely bald as a baby. She always had a little bit of peach fuzz, but she never was one of those. And I think the cannabis really helped with that a lot. Potentially, she never fully lost her hair again and just went full bald, but it would be very, very thin and straggly. And I remember when she was probably 4, when she started having seizures. They actually removed the part of brain that was damaged in the last really big brain surgery that she had. It was like 2 brain surgeries ago. The last one was more just to remove a cyst. But the last really massive, horrible brain surgery she had, they took that piece of brain out. But I'll never forget being able to see her spine and her bones as a little girl. And she's little, so she doesn't know. Thankfully, she wasn't a high school student that had to worry about, people picking on her or anything to that nature. But I just remember looking at her, and she was so emaciated from all the seizures and the chemotherapy. And we were trying to get the seizures under control, which we did, thankfully. Now they're gone. But I remember during that time, she was just having these regular seizures so much. And they were little seizures. They weren't the big tonic-clonic where she stops and convulses. They call them stop and stare seizures, but seizures nonetheless. And I just remember how the clothes would just hang on her, and how I would look at her and just think to myself, how is it that over the last 40 years, we've had so few drugs come to market, and this has not been as big of a deal to the world as it should be? Why are more people not talking about this? And so, with your podcast and the work we do on Capitol Hill together and the advocacy that's taken place, I feel like the conversation is growing. And I feel like there's more momentum. I feel like there's more people that are now paying attention to pediatrics. Seems like there's more companies getting involved. There's more foundations offering grants, which is our only... With our therapy, it's different because we have one therapy that we believe is going to work for many cancers. Most therapies work for 1 or 2. And when you're dealing with brain, it's kind of all over the board. But these new companies that are coming to market that have promising drugs, a lot of the times they don't. And I don't know if everyone knows this. A lot of the times the reason that they don't study children is because A, it's hundreds of millions of dollars to bring a drug to market. And B, the population of children is smaller. The age group is 0 to, you age out at 18. So that 0 to 17 age bracket, that's what you count as pediatric cancer. 18 to 100 is adult cancer. I mean, there are adults that are diagnosed with pediatric cancers. That's rare. But the population of children that are affected by DAPG is not big enough for a pharmaceutical company to recoup their costs on. There's just not enough children diagnosed in order for them to ever make their money back at any kind of pace that would satisfy their investors. And sadly, it's what it comes down to is money, and recruitment is often, because it's such a small class of individuals, because the age range is so narrow. It's often recruitment is very hard as well. But I feel like we're changing these things. We don't have that problem with treating children because we can treat all children with the same therapy, all adults with the same therapy. But it's been a hurdle. And to overcome that has been something that just, as anyone who's in the pediatric cancer world knows, there have not been a lot of success stories with drugs that have come to market, especially with brain cancer. There's still nothing that they can point to for DAPG, glioblastoma, recurrent medulloblastoma that's working and working well in a large population or even a small population of children. So I do feel like we're on the precipice, though, with AI and how that's going to help us advance science with the loudness that we're all using our voices now. We're all sitting up. I always say, if you want to get something done, give it to the parent of a sick kid. And that's how you get something done. And the advocacy work has been so critical and so important. And thank you for everything that you have done. I've continued to see you year after year fighting. I know that JC is so proud of you and what your family has done and how you've kept her story alive. Anyone that is in your world knows who your child is and knows the impact that she has had on this community and on your family, and in return, what you all have done to help companies like ours succeed with creating grants. It takes a village.
Yeah, it definitely does. And one of these days we're gonna stumble on the answer. We're gonna stumble on the right people that know the right people that decide that this is finally an issue. We obviously in this community, to hear the word rare is something I think is like the 4-letter cuss word we're not supposed to say. And we hear that word and it drives us crazy. And to be honest with you, without mentioning any names or showing any bias, I think a lot of that comes from very, very clever and unfortunately possibly misleading marketing in our community that makes it look like everything's okay. And it's not. It doesn't resemble a lot of what we see. And I think everybody can probably figure out what I'm talking about, but it doesn't resemble that. Pediatric cancer is ugly and it is horrible. And what it does to these kids, we tout these survival rates, but survival rates mean that you've survived past 5 years. After that, we're not counting anymore. Not us. We're counting every day. Mm-hmm. But according to the world, after 5 years, you're cancer free. But are you really ever? And the reality of it is that these kids, for the life that they have going through this afterward, is not always easy. And the reoccurrence and the 95% that you're going to have in a serious heart issue or lung issue or brain issue, something later on in life, just simply from the treatments, it's crazy. And, the story that I once heard that kind of got me going on all this I believe it was out of Philadelphia. And it was a girl that had gone in to have the final meeting with her oncologist and his final treatment, all that done, all that finished. And she's handed a notebook with a list of 12 different types of cancer she may get from the treatments that she had. That's the reality of this world right now. And so we have to focus our efforts in places where people actually want to make a difference. And unfortunately, yes, pharmaceutical companies can probably be the thorn in the paw of everybody in this country right now. Yes, it is money, and unfortunately, it's a business, and they have to make money. They have to pay their investors. They have to satisfy everybody. A lot of these drugs get put on the shelves because they're not profitable, and we can't always count on millionaires and billionaires to bail us out and come up with new ideas and maybe make something happen. Who knows? But I don't know. One of these, we're going to get there. And I know that you're not going to quit. And I know I'm not going to quit. And I know that these kids are going to continue to have their voices heard.